Hi. That big lead up. So my name is Melanie Trecek-King, and what led me to this project was my growing frustration with non-major science classes. We spend most of our time teaching students how to memorize a bunch of facts, maybe an introductory chapter on the process of science or the scientific method, and then we just force feed them facts and expect them to use them, think they're interesting, I don't know. But to me, it didn't seem very useful to them. So I designed this course to teach these skills instead. And in the process, what I discovered was starting right away with science almost puts the cart before the horse. Because science is a reliable way of knowing, but to understand why we need a reliable way of knowing, we have to first understand how irrational we are. And so in my classes, what I do is first teach them about what's going on in their head and how they can misperceive the world. And I often do that with these kinds of stories. So I know the topic today is why facts don't change people's minds. And I'm sure we've all had some kind of frustration talking with people that we disagree with on something that we think is really important, and we're pretty sure that we're right. And it doesn't work, right? We give them our facts, and they don't change their minds. But also, what have you changed your mind about? Right? And it's almost a rhetorical question, because it's often hard to think of the times when we've changed our minds, because we don't remember it. But maybe instead of trying to think about changing other people's minds, what we also want to do is reflect on what we believe and why, and be open to changing our own minds. So to start, I'm going to share with you one of the most important psychological studies in the 20th century, and it is an amazing story that I will end with. So in the 1950s, there was a woman named Dorothy Martin, and she was a housewife outside of Chicago. And she was a psychic. Her tool was automatic handwriting. So she would receive messages, and the messages would come out through her handwriting. And one morning, in 1954, she awoke suddenly and had a message. And she started writing, and the handwriting wasn't hers, and the information that came out of her brain, she was just surprised by and had to share with the world. So it was a message from Jesus, who was going by the name Sananna, an alien living on the planet Clarion. And Sananna and the other aliens, or they called themselves guardians, wanted Dorothy to gather what they called seekers so that she could spread their message. And so she did. People started to gather at her house, and they would have meetings, and she would share the messages that she was receiving. She had some really high-profile guests. One of them was Charles Lochhead, who was a professor at the local college. One morning on July 23rd, she got a message from the Guardians that the seekers were coming. The Guardians were going to come in their spaceship, and they were going to land at a nearby Air Force base, and they were to go out and meet them. And they got there, and there was no flying saucer. And they waited, and there was no aliens. And they stood on the side of the road for a while, and they saw like a strange man. He refused food or drink. They couldn't make much of him. But later, Dorothy got another message that had been Sananna. So she told the group, and they were super excited. So one morning in August, she got a dire message that the Earth was going to be destroyed in a global flood on December 21st. So she shared the message with the other seekers and said, we have to be ready for this flood. They're going to save us. And so it made some local waves, and it got into the newspaper. And psychologist Leon Festinger was reading his Sunday morning paper over his coffee and saw this little article and thought, there was end of days cults, but thought, I wonder what will happen on December 22nd when the world is still there. So he and his fellow psychologists infiltrated the group, and for the next several months, they waited to see what would happen. So keep a pin in that. So belief is actually a really difficult concept to define, and I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of it. But basically, it's things that you think are true. Things that you accept. They don't have to be true, but they are things that you accept as true. They're also mental models of how you think the world works. So new information comes in, it has to fit with how you think the world is supposed to work. One of the great things about magic tricks is because they question our assumptions about reality. So beliefs impact how we see the world. We often hear the phrase that seeing is believing, but oftentimes it's the other way around too. So there's this interplay between our beliefs and perceptions. But our beliefs impact our behaviors. Right? This is important. We make decisions based on what we think is true about the world. Right? So if we think COVID could be a threat, then we're going to take certain precautions. If we think it's a hoax, then we won't. Right? It's constantly influences the decisions that we make. But beliefs come from a variety of sources. The two primary ones that I want to talk about is from others, or what we're going to call received wisdom. They're from socialization. So in this case, it could be anything from geography. So if you look at a map of the world religions, there's a clear pattern, right? People tend to adopt the religious beliefs of the people in their area. So just simple geography, the culture of the geography can infiltrate how you see the world. Authorities, like kids believe in Santa because their parents tell them that Santa's real. Or, we all then really conspire, right? We put Santas in the mall, and then NORAD has a Santa tracking map, when it comes to Christmas Eve. So, they have good reasons to believe in Santa. They're trusting the people around them. We get them from our family, and we get them from our tribe. So humans are a tribal species. In the vast majority of our history, we lived in small groups, and those small groups were our protection, our belonging, and we had to trust them. They were literally our survival mechanism. We don't live in small tribes anymore. But we're still a tribal species. It's just now the tribes that we have tend to be grouped around our different identities. So, for example, one of my identities could be American. But when I'm in the States, and nearly everyone is American, that's not an identity that's particularly important to me. But when I travel and I run into an American, I automatically have that identity activated because I now share something that's in particular in the minority. Majority identities don't tend to be triggered as often as minority identities. But it could be anything from our religion, our nationalities, our political tribes. So our brains need to take shortcuts about what we think is true. We can't take the time to evaluate every single one of our beliefs. So we shortcut. Are we hearing this from people that we trust? And if we are, we tend to accept that as true. And importantly, it's really hard to go against our tribe. It is much easier to disagree with people that aren't in our tribe than it is with people that are. And so we don't want to risk being ostracized. Oftentimes, tribe literally trumps truth. It's more important to us to stay in good standing with our group than it is to risk being ostracized. We also get them from our personal experiences. I personally have found in teaching critical thinking, this is one of the most important lessons for students to understand. We think, I know aliens are real. I saw one. I know homeopathy works. I tried it. Right? We think that our personal experiences are accurately informing us about the world. We don't recognize that our brains have no direct access to outside. It's this gray matter inside of our black box skull, and it has some nerve inputs from our different senses. And then once it gets in there, our brains have to make sense of it. And it makes sense of it with, what does it already know about how the world works? What are existing assumptions? What are our biases? All of that then impacts our perceptions. Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, I saw a ghost. So I must have been 5 or 6. And my grandma had come to stay, and she was sleeping in the bed next to me. And I woke up, and I could still feel it, like a fingernail went up my arm, just really slowly, like a long, like jagged fingernail. It seemed like it took forever. And then I wanted to wake my grandma up and tell her to help me. And I couldn't. I looked up and I saw this scary looking old woman, and she was holding me down and keeping me from screaming, like trying to tell her there's a ghost here. I know now, that was sleep paralysis. You know what sleep paralysis is? Yeah, so when we're sleeping, our brains, they turn off the nerves to our skeletal muscles so that we don't act out what's going on in our brain. In sleep paralysis, the brain is on, but this hasn't been turned back on yet. And sleep paralysis has plagued humanity. You can see evidence of it in like the old art paintings of like demons holding people down in their sleep. But we explain that by whatever our brain tells us. So in this moment, I'm seeing something that's helping me explain why I can't move, right? And what my 5-year-old brain had to work with was Disney movies. So the ghost was the witch from Seven Dwarfs. Like, I know that now, but at the time it was really terrifying. But we explain it with murderers or aliens abducting us. That's not a real experience, and that there's not really a ghost. It's my perception fooling me with what I think might be happening to me. But most of all, we come to our beliefs through trust. Trust in ourselves, trust in others. Again, it's just easier to believe than it is to question. I mean, we're all familiar with skepticism here. We want to demand evidence to accept claims, but accept them proportional to the evidence that's available. But sometimes it's just easier to believe. We can't question everything. And so we trust. We trust certain people. We trust ourselves. There's some, I'm sure you've heard post-truth, the phrase post-truth. I'm along the lines of, it's not really post-truth, it's post-trust. We don't know, we're placing our trust with our tribe or with certain groups that we think deserve our trust, instead of relying on groups that are using good sources, processes of learning. So we really do need to make sure that we place our trust wisely. But it just starts with knowing that that's what your brain is doing. Your brain is forming those beliefs based on those shortcuts. And the question is, are those shortcuts leading you to reality or not? Now, our beliefs form kind of a web. This concept is from Web of Belief with Van Orman-Quine. But the idea is that beliefs don't exist in isolation. So if we consider the web of beliefs, in the center are the core beliefs. They're the ones that are really important to us, that are important to our identity, to our belonging in certain groups. So we have the core, and then we can move out. If a new belief comes in, if new information comes in, and we're trying to make sense of, is this belief true? You've got this whole web of belief that it has to fit in. Each one of those little connections, I like to think of as a node. They're different beliefs, and they're related to each other. You can't pluck one out, right? The whole thing would crumble. What we need to do when thinking about our own beliefs and of others is, this belief, where is it in terms of how important it is to them? And what do I need to alter in the other beliefs that connect to it to affect this belief? Also, not all beliefs are the same. So I like to think of beliefs in these two broad categories of things that we can prove wrong and things that we can't prove wrong. So we often, when trying to determine if a belief is true, we look for evidence to support it. Right? We find our reasons for why that belief is true. But all of our beliefs are evidence-based. So think of it this way. The unfalsifiable beliefs are impossible to disprove. Falsifiable beliefs can be proven wrong. If something is false, if we have falsified it, it's a falsifiable belief. It's just the false one. Does that make sense? So everything that we know that's factually not true is a falsifiable belief. It's just not true. The unfalsifiable stuff is stuff that we can't prove wrong. Now, the problem is we mistake evidence for something as in true, but evidence for beliefs that can't be disproven is really meaningless because the belief itself, because it's unfalsifiable, is immune to evidence. Let me give you a few examples. So the first category of unfalsifiable beliefs is subjective ones. These are like personal preferences, opinions, morals and ethics, values. Some of these beliefs are the ones that we hold the most tightly. For example, if I said kittens are cuter than puppies. Thank you. Yeah, right? So, like, I mean, it's kind of a silly one, but I mean, I could come up with great evidence. Cats make better pets than dogs. Why is that? Well, they're self-cleaning. They're quiet. I don't have to take them outside. Like, I found evidence for why that's true, but it's still a non-falsifiable belief. It can't ever be proven wrong. Also, kittens are cuter than babies. Ooh, yeah, I just said it. Now, some of these, though, tend to be really foundational to us. Things like abortion is wrong, right? Or our beliefs about racism, or our beliefs about, freedom and liberty. Like, those are all not factual beliefs. We can come up with reasons for why those beliefs are true, for why we hold those beliefs. But that doesn't mean that they are true, because they can't ever be shown to be true. And we need to know this type of belief that I hold is one that I hold despite being an evidence-based belief, instead of trying to find evidence for why those things are true. Okay, vague beliefs. These are the things that are just so unclear that they can't be measured. So if I said, you have a need to be liked and admired by other people. Who here is that not true for? Right? And yet that's the basis of horoscopes. Or if I said, this supplement boosts the immune system, it supports the respiratory system, what does that mean? Actually, supplements by law aren't allowed to make specific health claims because they're not approved by the FDA. But you see a bottle of supplements and it says all these really awesome vague things, and we think, oh, that must mean it's super duper awesome, instead of it just didn't say anything. Okay? Then there are the supernatural beliefs. These are like ghosts, God, spirits. The exception, of course, is if it leaves physical evidence. But if it doesn't, so for example, if I said that COVID is God's punishment. No, I've seen that a lot. But what does that mean? I mean, COVID is falsifiable, but God's punishment is not. And then there are the excuses. These are the things that we come up with to keep a belief from being falsified. This is something that we really want to believe. So we just move the goalpost and move it and alter conditions a bit until we finally get to, well, it's my opinion, or something to that effect. Conspiracy theorists are masters at this. So what they do is they're constantly making excuses for why evidence doesn't support the conspiracy, right? Evidence was planted, or it's hidden and covered up, or whatever it is. It's all ways to prevent the conspiracy from being disproven, even tested. Okay, so not all beliefs are the same. This George Carlin quote, have you ever noticed that anybody driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone going faster than you is a maniac? Right. Of course my position is the right one. Right? It's why I hold it. I have thought about this. I'm right. The people to the right of me are wrong. The people to the left of me are wrong. My position is the one that's correct because I felt long and hard about it and I have the best evidence? Okay, I know you've seen this. Show of hands. Who sees this as blue and black? Who sees it as white and gold? Really? We had a nice long conversation about this. Yeah, the dress is one of those, it was the fight that broke the internet, like back in 2015 or something. Isn't it really quaint to think of a dress breaking the internet at this point? But we were fighting about it so much it crashed Twitter. People could not believe that people saw this dress differently. You saw it one way or the other, and you can't see it the other way. And so we all had these arguments over, how could you possibly be seeing it that way? It is clearly this way. And it's something as like simple, as meaningless as the color of a dress. But imagine, if you will, forming political tribes around this, right? I'm a blue and black person. You are a white and gold person. Because we're literally seeing it different. Now, there is a reality of what color the dress is. It's blue and black, by the way. But we form these tribes often around beliefs, and some of it can be down to perceiving the world differently. So I show this to my students who have seen this, of course, but it is really fun to be in a room full of people where they're arguing over the color of this dress, and it makes the point so perfectly. The kinds of things that we argue about, consider they may actually be perceiving it differently than you. So if there is different perspectives that lead to part of reality, we can learn what reality is by listening to each other, by assuming that we have the right way. We miss out on an opportunity to explore why we disagree. The disagreement is less important than the reasoning behind it. How did we get there? And by exploring those different perspectives, we can question ours, question theirs, and come to an overall better version of reality. There's a concept in psychology called naive realism, which is that we think we perceive the world as it is. The way that I see the world is reality. When somebody disagrees with us, we think, well, they have their facts wrong. So we give them our facts. Does that work? No. Well, so then we think, well, maybe they're stupid. Or maybe they're evil. Right? Why is it that they're disagreeing with me on this? I have my facts. Different people can use the same information, see the same event, and come up with drastically different conclusions. Different people watching the same sporting event that root for different teams will see what happens in that game differently. They're rooting for their team. Calls that go against them, well, that's not fair. But the other team is seeing something completely different. We do this with elections. There's polls that show after elections, when the White House changes between Republican and Democrat, within just a couple of weeks, there is a drastic and mirror image difference between how Republicans and Democrats perceive the economy. It's the same economy because it's just a couple of weeks. But yet, I'm a Democrat's in charge, the economy is so much better than it was before. We're seeing the same thing, but we're not. I like to think of these goggles, right? Our perception is not reality. Our perception is a subjective interpretation of reality. It's incomplete, it's flawed, it's biased, it's emotional. Also, our brains hate ambiguity. It doesn't like uncertainty. So what we do is, if any information comes in that's ambiguous, our brains just resolve that right away, jump to a conclusion, and never let you know that you were unsure. Which is why you can then, well, the dress is clearly this color. Richard Feynman had this great quote. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. So I'm saying with my students, I find the most important introductory lessons are you do not perceive the world as it is. If you want to know what reality is, we need a better way, but it starts with knowing that your perceptions could be fooling you. Have you seen this before? If you have, okay. If you haven't, what do you think? Give me about 5 seconds to answer that question. What is it? 10 cents. Is it 10 cents? Say it again?
I'll volunteer if everyone else has decided.
Okay.
It's obviously 5. The ball is 5 cents.
The ball is 5 cents. And why do you say that? What is your reasoning?
Oh, unfair. I need the arithmetic like that.
Well, if it's 10 cents and the ball, the bat is $1 more than the ball, how much would the total be? $1.20. Okay. This is one of the questions on the cognitive reflection test. And they've done it even at Harvard. Students are like, 10 cents, right? People, initially, 10 cents. But it's called a cognitive reflection test for a reason. Because if you went with the answer that jumped right out at you, you were wrong. But if you stopped to think about it, you could get there. But who likes to stop and think about it? Our brains are lazy. Which leads me to the elephant and the writer. Anybody heard this analogy before? A few of you? So Daniel Kahneman proposed his 2 systems, thinking system 1 and system 2, and his thinking fast and slow. I find that the systems are difficult for my students, so I use the elephant and the writer analogy, which is Jonathan Haidt. So the idea is an oversimplification, but if you think about your brain divided into 2, there's an elephant and there's a writer on top of the elephant. The elephant is fast. You don't have to think about it. The elephant is fight, flight, or freeze. It's your intuitions and gut. It jumps to conclusions. And then it's always on. And it's in control. Now, the writer is capable of thinking logically, but it doesn't want to, right? It's lazy, so it takes effort to turn it on. So most of the time, the elephant's on top of the writer going, yeah, what the elephant said. Even more, the elephant, or the writer will then, so the elephant has suggested something, and the writer goes, here are the reasons why the elephant is right. Instead of questioning the elephant is really strong and powerful. It's pretty hard to control. Let me give you an example. I have a cake addiction. Actually, it's a frosting addiction. The cake helps deliver the frosting. And I really like to eat cake at night. So, you know, I'm thinking cake. My elephant is thinking cake. And the writer knows that I probably should not eat the cake. But then the writer goes, you know what? You were really good all day. You went for a walk. You're going to work out in the morning, right? It gives me all the reasons why the elephant is right. In order to address that behavior, though, I'm going to have to not control strong arm the elephant. I'm going to have to think about why is it the elephant wants that, right? But again, this is a metacognition process where we have to be aware of what's going on in our brains. One more thing about the writer. So the writer likes to justify the elephant's beliefs. But in a tribe, the writers that make the best arguments for why the tribe's beliefs are correct, usually a belief that is important to their elephants, we reward those writers. We reward the people that make the best arguments for our position. Even if they're not true, right? They're important to us. They bind us to our social groups. But that kind of social status is something that we like. I mean, it gets to where, again, our tribe is trumping truth. We care more about our standing in that group and making good arguments than we do for being right. Which then leads to what I call the overconfidence cycle. So think of motivated reasoning is the emotionally fueled search for reasons to justify a belief that we want to hold. Okay? So our motivated reasoning is the motivated reasoning. It is helping us find justifications. Confirmation bias is the tendency to find evidence, to remember things that confirms our beliefs more than things that don't. Now, there's a close connection between the two of them, obviously, but the more important a belief is, the more motivated we are to reason, the more our confirmation bias kicks in. And then look, we found reasons, right? If we're really motivated, we have found all kinds of reasons for why our belief is true. And then we're really confident. We're really sure we're right. Look, I have all these reasons. The problem is, how do you know if you're wrong? Like, what is the difference between being wrong and being right? What does it feel like?
Nobody wants to be wrong.
Nobody wants to be wrong. Yeah. Can you tell if you're wrong? I mean, it's kind of a trick question, because it feels the same, doesn't it? Do you know if you're wrong? I mean, if you knew you were wrong, you wouldn't be wrong. But you are almost certainly not right about everything you believe. You're wrong about something. What is it? You need other people to help you find those biases and blind spots. Have you ever heard that the full moon affects crime or kids' behaviors? Or it's called the full moon effect. Actually, the word lunacy comes from lunar. There's this long-standing idea that the full moon makes us behave all kinds of weird, and it makes us commit more crimes, and more people go to the ER. And so if you ask, a nurse, the ER is full, must be a full moon. Okay, that has been studied. There's no impact on crime. There's no impact on kids' behaviors. There's no impact on emergency room visits. Yet police, you tell them that, and they will absolutely tell you you're wrong. And do you know why they're wrong? They can give you all of this times they've experienced it, and it was true, right? They don't remember the times that the full moon happened and there wasn't more crime. Or they don't remember all the times there was a bunch of crime and there was no full moon. They're only remembering the times that confirm their biases. And then they get so sure they're right. I posted this on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and I can't believe how attached people are to this, right? Full moon. So the more important a belief is to how we see ourselves, the more motivated we are to protect it. We project to the world like a personal brand. This is who I am, this is what I believe. We like to show ourselves as being consistent. We signal some beliefs more than others, and if we signal them, they are very important to us. We don't want to be wrong. No one likes to be wrong. And it's really a shame, because how do you change your mind and learn unless you're wrong? I'm trying to think of who said it. I think it was Daniel Kahneman. Said something to the effect of, if you can embrace the joy of being wrong, then you'll get to change your mind and learn. And I just remember that phrase, joy of being wrong. Wow, that is something to aspire to. But yeah, the difference then is, if we detach our beliefs from our identities, it is much easier to be objective about it. It is hard to be objective about a belief when you have skin in the game. But when it's not important to you, like if I said, what is the capital of Australia? Don't say it. Don't say it. No, I don't. I want you to not say. Oh, thank you. Most people go, and then they name the only city they can think of, which is Sydney. right? And then I'm like, well, no, it's Canberra. Okay, how do you feel about that? And they're like, right? Who cares if they're wrong about the capital of Australia? No offense. But when it's important to us, though, it's a completely different reaction. Add to that, when those beliefs aren't just part of our identity, but part of our tribal identity, part of how we see ourselves within our group, becomes even more important. And again, humans do this by our nature. We're tribal. We will form groups over literally anything. But once we do, we defend our tribe. So, I often hear people say that facts don't care about your feelings. And it's true. But also, our feelings don't care about facts. So, facts aren't neutral in the sense of how we use them to support our beliefs. So at the top, you can see we think we follow evidence to a conclusion. Right? We think our rider's in control, and we think that we're following evidence to a conclusion. And we are right because of these facts. But most of the time, we're actually doing the bottom one. We have arrived at a conclusion through an irrational way. Socialization, personal experiences, whatever it is, and the more important that belief is to us, the better we are at finding the justifications to get to our conclusion. And the really bad news is that being smarter or more educated does not help. Actually, there's evidence that it makes it worse because we get better at finding reasons for our beliefs. So, we think disagreements are over facts, but they're not. They're not over facts. We may be talking about facts, using our facts, rebutting facts, but that's not really what we're talking about. Think about some of these big issues that divide us today. Go down a really long list. Everything from gun rights or abortion rights or COVID or vaccines or climate change, whatever it is. We think we're talking about facts, but there's something underneath that's motivating that belief. And so these surface level discussions, arguments, where we just pelt facts back and forth, isn't going to work, because that's not what it's about. Okay, right, December 21st. What's going to happen? So the date is December 21st, but they were also told the guardians could come at any moment, so they should be ready. Okay, so the world was ending, so of course, they gave away their money, lost their jobs, some of them lost their kids. Why would you need money? The world's going to end. So they moved in with Dorothy, getting ready for when the moment was going to happen. They were told they couldn't wear metal on the flying saucers because it would disrupt something on the ship. So they made sure to take out their zippers and underwires, and if they had metal fillings, right? They wanted to make sure they didn't have any metal. But the most important thing was that they needed to believe, right? So on December 17th, Dorothy got a phone call from Captain Video from Outer Space. They were being pranked, right? Apparently that was a popular show at the time, but they didn't notice. But they told her that a flying saucer would land in her backyard that day at 4 o'clock. So, got ready. Removed zippers, jewelry, underwires, grabbed their prophecies, which were Dorothy's writings, ran out to the backyard, and there's no flying saucer. And like an hour and a half passes. At 5:30, they decide they have to go inside because there was not going to be any aliens that saved them, but then Dorothy got a message from Sednana that had been a practice session. So they were just testing to make sure when the real date happened that Dorothy and the Seekers would be ready to go. On December 18th, she got another message. They were coming now. So again, they got ready, waited, no flying saucer. Okay, but still December 21st. That was the date, right? So December 21st. This is coming from Leon Fessinger and the psychologist that had infiltrated the group. They were really tense and anxious, as you might imagine. This was going to be it. They were going to be vindicated and saved. At midnight, there was no aliens. At 12:05, somebody noticed that the clock was wrong. It was 5 minutes fast. So it was okay. I had a bit of breathing room. At 12:10, Dorothy said, there's apparently been a change in plans, so we just need to wait a little bit longer. At 2:20 a.m., Dorothy got another message from Sanana. Apparently they needed to take a coffee break, so they did. But then they just sort of sat around the parlor looking at each other, expressionless, frozen. What had they missed? So tense. And, this is the moment. What was going to happen? Do you think they changed their minds? Do you think they, oh, you know what? We were wrong this whole time. There's no aliens. I mean, of course not. That's what people do. So, at 4:45, the good news finally came. That their belief had saved the world from the flood. There wasn't even going to be a flood because their belief had saved the world. They were not only vindicated, they were more right than they ever even thought. They saved the world. Yeah. This comes from Charles Lawhead, the professor. He said, I've had to go a long way. I've given up just about everything. I've cut every tie. I've burned every bridge. I've turned my back on the world. I can't afford to doubt. I have to believe. And there isn't any other truth. The more we invest in our beliefs, the more we stake our public reputation on those beliefs, the more motivated we are to protect them. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about the aliens and the Seeker's Cult over the last few years, because I kept thinking, well, surely they're going to see now that Trump will not be back in office, or that COVID actually is real. I mean, people have died on their deathbeds convinced that COVID was a hoax. You'd think that that would be when they would finally change their minds. But how painful would that be, to admit that you didn't take something seriously enough and it killed you? So we protect ourselves instead. This comes from Leon Festinger in Prophecy Fails. Suppose an individual believes something with his whole heart. Suppose, further, that he has a commitment to this belief, that he's taken irrevocable actions because of it. Finally, suppose he's presented with evidence, unequivocal and undeniable evidence that his belief is wrong. What will happen? The individual will frequently emerge not only unshaken, but even more convinced of the truth of his beliefs than ever before. Indeed, he may even show a new fervor about convincing and converting other people to his beliefs. We don't want to change our minds, especially when it's important to us. So, what are you wrong about? Also, it's not about facts. When having discussions with people, remember, it's about the underlying motivations. This stuff is way easier to see in other people than it is to see in ourselves. I always tell my students, if you're going to start trying to find biases and fallacies, sure, start on other people, but don't point it out because people don't like that. But the goal is to turn it in on yourself and find your own logical flaws. So take-home messages. The first thing is to put your writer to good use. Try to avoid using your writer to justify beliefs, and instead question them. And remember that you might be wrong, so be humble. I actually always tell my students to have a scientific attitude, which I've gotten from Lee McIntyre over here. Be curious, be skeptical, and be humble. And talk to their elephants. I think the perception lessons are important not only because it helps us understand how our perceptions could be fooling us, but also to have empathy for other people, because they might actually be perceiving the world differently than you. And be curious about that difference. It allows you an opportunity to find flaws in your own thinking and maybe find something that you were wrong about. But that's very difficult to do if you tie your beliefs to who you are. So to be objective, try to separate your belief from your identity and dig to find what the disagreement is actually about. Remember, it's not about facts, and it's probably not for you either. So talk to their elephant, and remember that your elephant is involved too. What are the underlying motivations for your belief? I use this exercise with my students, and I always tell them to start on beliefs that are less important to them, like the capital of Australia, for example. But for example, the first is to proportion your belief. To stop trying to think about a belief as true or not, but how sure are you? This simple proportioning can be a really powerful exercise to not only open people to the possibility of changing their minds, but even just reducing extremism in a belief, the source of the belief. So this is digging down to, where did I get this from? Is it from my parents? Is it from a news program? Where is it from? Your reasons. This is where you find evidence for why you think it's true. But also, how could you figure out if it was true? This is, can I figure out if it's true? Is it falsifiable? How would you feel if you're wrong? This is where we start to notice your elephant's involvement. If you would feel something strong, anger, sadness, if you would feel something strong from being wrong, this is a pretty good sign that your elephant is attached to this belief. And what would change your mind? So always be able to think about what would change your mind. The difference between a skeptic and a denier is a skeptic can think of reasonable reasons that would cause them to change their mind, but a denier is not going to. I'm going to end with just a little bit of an exercise here to take one further step, because I think I have time. I'm going to give you, and if you've heard this, please let others experience it. I'm going to give you a series of numbers, and the numbers obey a rule. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 numbers that obey a rule, and your job is to figure out what the rule is. And to test the rule, what I want you to do is try to figure out what the rule is, and then tell me what the rule is, and then I will tell you if it obeys or not, and then maybe have you propose a series of numbers as well. All right. The numbers are 2, 4, 6. So what I want you to do, have the rule in your head, and then tell me 3 numbers that you think would obey your rule. Anybody want to play? 2, 4, 6. Okay, what do you think the rule is? And then test me by giving me your 3 numbers. 2, 4, 6. Yep. Okay, that obeys the rule. What do you think the rule is? That is not the rule. Okay, so it obeys the rule, but that's not the rule. Excellent. Yeah.
If I were testing the belief, I wouldn't want to pick something that obeys the rule, I want to pick something that defies the rule. So I'm going to say 11, 13, 15.
Okay, that obeys the rule. What's your rule? Oh, you were testing his. So his was multiples of 2. Okay, yours is 2. It's just odd numbers.
Yeah, even.
But you're on to something, Lee. Because what you said was, if I wanted to test the rule, I wouldn't try to confirm it. Right? You want to go again?
-1, the square root of 5.
And what was the last number?
41.
That obeys the rule. What's your rule?
Numbers.
No. It is more specific than that. But thanks for making me do math.
How about just numbers between 10, and so it's 7, 8, 9.
Okay, that obeys the rule. That's not the rule.
Just any three numbers?
That's not the rule. Yeah?
Increase by any number?
Oh. So they're just increasing numbers. That is my rule.
Oh, I got that right.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay. But yes, most people, what they do is they come up with the rule and then they're looking for ways to confirm the rule. So the lesson here is that don't try to confirm your beliefs, try to disprove them. So instead of looking for numbers that confirm your rule, if you have your rule, try to disprove it. What would not have satisfied that? So if your first rule was what?
Multiples of 2.
Multiples of 2. Okay, and so if I said that was not the rule, wait a minute, how would you have tested that? Multiples of 2. Instead of testing it to find examples of multiples of 2, test it by trying to prove that wrong.
I would try some odd numbers. I would try the reverse, but 6, 4, 2.
Okay, and I would have said that does not follow the rule, and that would have gotten you closer.
And more specifically, I was going for decreasing multiples of 2, which kind of,
And there's different ways to test that. You could have done multiples of 5 instead, right? It's a fun parlor game. Play it with your family later.
I'm going to play this.
Awesome. Because the point is, don't try to prove yourself right. If you're looking for evidence you're right, you will find it. Try to prove yourself wrong. If it's true, it will withstand scrutiny. So scrutinize it. And if it stands up to the scrutiny, then you have more reasons, better justification to accept it. But it's a subtle shift in thinking, right? Beating confirmation bias. So instead of looking for evidence why you're right, try to disprove yourself. Try to prove yourself wrong. Okay. So the point here is that critical thinking, skepticism, metacognition, these are excellent skills to help us understand our own thinking and others. But it's not about facts. And if we want to figure out what's true, we have to keep in mind that we could be wrong, be curious, and demand evidence. So I'd just like to say thank you for having me here. Thanks, Stuart and the Greater Boston Humanists. I really appreciate this. And if you have any questions.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. And reactions. But my first question is, and this is off the cuff because I can't think of anything off the cuff. But can you give me an example of a fact that is provable, to use that vernacular, that is tied to identity? For example, you use the dress that broke the internet as an example. That is provable. We can say whether it's blue or red. There is it falls on a certain angstrom of wavelength. It's either blue or whatever the other color was. That's definably provable what the color it is. Is there a fact that is provable but is tied to someone's identity? Because in most cases where people are emotively involved with, or things that are emotively involved or tied to identity, that's completely subjective. Abortion, issues of abortion, issues of religion, issues of politics, these tribal, opinions, those are opinions, beliefs that are based upon, that are not provably demonstrably proved. There's no argument, at least I believe, there's no argument about, is 2 an odd number? No one's having it up. There's no political debate about, no, 2 is odd, no, 2 is even. There's no dispute about it. But dispute on opinions about, should smokers, should we block off smokers, should we have abortion, these are subjective something that's proven fact that is tied to identity. So no, you're wrong. 2 is an even number. I'm sorry. Whether you might be a true artist, but you're wrong. So I'm just thinking if there's any example, particular example you can think of.
I mean, yeah, all of science denial comes to mind. Anthropogenic climate change,
Climate change,
evolution.
okay, so climate change, that's very interesting. That's not science, because that's not falsifiable. Climate change, that's not falsifiable. Let's go back to, again, because we don't have a twin Earth. We don't have a way of, we can speculate as to causes and motivations, but we don't have a twin Earth where we can say, well, let's test that out.
Yeah, okay.
Verify.
So there's a couple things here.
And that's not tied to identity. That's not tied to identity.
Well, so climate change denial is strongly tied to identity.
Well,
So-
denial, that's an imposition. You're labeling others. So those who are pro-climate change versus denial. When you use denial, you're imposing what the others that disagree with what they claim about advocates of climate change. You're imposing what they're saying. They're denying. That's imposing a label on them. I don't think anyone who's denying said, I deny it. You know,
No,
I don't
nobody
think they
identifies as a
identify
denier.
themselves as a denier. So that's labeling. That's not saying, that's not tied to their identity. They're saying, because I'm a denier, or whatever word they use, that's, I don't believe it. That doesn't, that's not,
I'm sorry. I actually, there's a couple of denial scholars in here, so if they want to jump in. What I would say is no one identifies as a denier, right? But there are groups that identity is based on denial. They just call it something else. It's like flat earthers come to mind. Or people who deny climate change, deny evolution. And there are aspects of that are falsifiable. So there's a couple of things here. The Earth warming is an empirical observable fact. So we have our fact there that the Earth is warming. Our explanations for why that is, so humans causing climate change, that's an inductive argument, and those can never be proven, but they can be disproven, and it hasn't been. And other explanations for the cause of climate change have been disproven. And so, denial doesn't have to be like I deny a fact. It can be denying explanations, because our explanations, again, we will never prove. And so if we're proportioning, if we're at humans are causing climate change, 99.9% sure that that's true, denying that would be a form of denial and does strongly be a tie to identity. Interestingly, the reason for that denial, the motivation for that denial in this case, comes from generally a lack of wanting government regulations. So there is a aversion to a solution that is motivating the denial.
So there's politics involved. So
Okay,
there's
but then,
there's politics involved.
but
So
wait.
The colors that sort of colors, the sort of, not colors, that taints the issue, the issue, because it's not purely a scientific.
Okay,
It's
the
not purely a
solutions
scientific
to
because
climate
it is
change
into,
are the solutions are subjective. They are ideological. We could propose solutions and have different evidence for the efficacy of those solutions, but what we decide to do and how important we think the issue is, those are definitely subjective things, but the actual belief, the Earth is round, so denying that would be denying an empirical fact, and certainly an identity built around it, especially since most people in those kinds of minorities, extreme beliefs, are ridiculed for their beliefs outside of their bubble. And the more someone is ridiculed or shamed for a belief, then the more you trigger the defensiveness to it. Shame is never a motivator. That's sort of a side tangent. But yeah, there was another question. Yes, sir. Oh, yes.
I create a lot of pain. I gender identity technologies, they stop people from continuing on the path they trusted, because now the technology I created is preferred and the technology they were using dies out. And so people walk around with a lot of hatred. They hate it when that happens. And so I'm glad that we focus your attention a lot on the feelings that people generate, because I notice that people often get tangled up in factoids and factual argumentation when they don't know who the designer was. Nobody gave me permission to change their life and mess it up. And they don't have a path forward, and they hate it when that happens, and I got a bag of hatred. And so now the bag of hatred, what do I do with that?
Huh.
Well, I had a friend who used to say, some people have hardening of the categories, which is a disease that sometimes could, I think, be related to this. And I'm curious whether you're thinking about the emotional, and I'm very glad you point out that emotions are at the bottom of a whole lot of what happens when people think it might be facts that are actually on the center of the stage. But how many people who come to your classes know design engineers mess everybody's life up with new technologies, and they hate it when that happens. And now they need a bag of hatred to go, wait, well, I got some beliefs, and I notice some other people don't. Let's take the other people who don't and use them. Now I can do something about my inner feelings because I got a higher social rank than those idiots. What do you think?
I love the phrase bag of hatred.
I'm sorry.
I love the phrase bag of hatred. That is, it's a very useful visual. And I can almost see someone trying to blame someone for the hatred. And again, that's human nature. We're not only form groups, and we like to know why our lives have these problems, and it's very easy to scapegoat the other, however it is that we define it. I also, just a side tangent, but now I know who to blame when my technology goes
You
wrong.
don't know my name. You don't know where I live.
Okay. Lee, I'll come right a second. Yeah, Joe?
I'd like to just, can you hear me okay?
I can, but nobody else can.
Okay, I'll be short then. Just to take you for a moment from the micro to the macro, because we're clearly in an age of post-truth, as you said, with reliance on overconfidence in our opinions. And I think it's even exacerbated in this age when we have search engines.
Yeah.
We're using AI to sort of like serve as an echo chamber to kind of confirm our beliefs. So what I wanted to ask you is that I think that this post-truth experience that we have right now is perhaps the greatest spur that we have in democracy in our societies, and perhaps an inducement to the sort of fascist trends that we're seeing across the world. And I was wondering if you could move from individual instruction to individuals, but what we can do at a societal level. Are you aware, for example, of movements that are using critical thinking to try to correct some of these incursions into the opportunity to develop genuine democracy across the world?
Joe, that was a really good question.
I don't know if everyone heard that.
Yeah, could you make the question?
Yeah, it was basically trying to move out from like the classroom to see what kinds of things we could be doing like at a population or societal level. Yes, let me back up for a second. One of the things that I think really works with the class structure is that, for 4 months I have students captive, and they have to follow me for 4 months. They want to grade, right? So there's a structure that I've laid out, and it's really great to take them through the whole process. And I think that works, but we can't put everybody through something like that. I'm actually part of a new project, and these two over here both are. This is John Cook and Lee McIntyre, and we're all part of a new group that focuses on mental immunity with Andy Norman, if you're familiar with the book Mental Immunity. It's focused on something called inoculation theory. So inoculation theory is basically an analogy for misinformation with vaccines. So like a vaccine would expose somebody to a bit of a germ so that the body could build resistance to it. Inoculation theory uses bits of misinformation, and they build up mental antibodies against the real thing. I use this in my classes with really great benefit. I use something called active inoculation, where students create misinformation. So like I have my students make conspiracy theories. I have them design ads for pseudoscience products. I've got an example of that on there with my little Dr. Magic's Miracle Cure or whatever. I have them argue illogically, but by getting students to create misinformation, they can build their own antibodies and see in the real world, well, you know what? I can see the characteristics of conspiracy theories because I made one, right? So a great example at the population level would be the game Cranky Uncle, where Cranky Uncle, so John Cook is the creator of Cranky Uncle, where they would, they play a game with a cranky, you know who Cranky Uncle is, right? I don't even have to tell you. Oh no, I mean like, you know the character I have in mind when I say cranky. It's like the guy at Thanksgiving that you don't want to talk to about climate change. So the game, you play a cranky uncle and you learn his characteristics, his techniques of denial through making him angry, and I'm spotting the characteristics. Did I do a good job? Yeah, sort of. Okay. So, but at the population level, what does this look like? What can we do to inoculate people against misinformation? And so, long-winded answer to your question, Joe, that new effort, I'm hoping, look, if it doesn't work, I don't know what else will. Critical thinking is the answer to our problems. I don't know another answer. So the question is, how do we get critical thinking to more people? And I certainly think efforts like that are worth exploring. There's other examples of that too, and I can give you a link. On my website with different examples of things that you can do to inoculate yourself against misinformation. Yeah. Oh, and Lee, you're next.
So I think in your talk that for some people to change their beliefs, you have to change their identity. So how do you change someone's identity?
Well, I encourage my students to take an identity of a scientist, right? Like the scientific attitude, where instead of making your identity what you believe, your identity is the process by which you evaluate beliefs. So being willing to question them, being curious about them, demanding evidence, and being humble. Right? You could be wrong. I also encourage my students to not play on a team, to be the ref instead. So anytime you play on a team, it changes your perception of reality. So just shift in your brain from this is the side I'm on to, I'm not playing in this game. I'm here to evaluate what's happening. Yeah.
So except for being humble, I tried everything else you just said with this group.
Okay.
With the decades, not just years. And it has never worked. Because even though I'm a violent atheist, and I don't mean physical violence, I am also a reindeer social justice.
A what?
Reindeer social governance.
Okay.
And again, except for being humble, I have tried every word you just said, and never succeeded in any.
What is your goal?
My goal is to persuade people that they all only have one life, very important to live for yourself first and foremost. Just like when you're on a plane, you first put the mask, the oxygen on yourself before you put on the baby, even though if you have a choice, you would let the baby survive, not yourself.
And why is it important to you to do that?
Because I believe the society will be much better and everybody takes care of yourself first. Self-responsibility, self-reliance is far more important than anything else in my opinion, from all different kinds of political systems that experience in life.
So I think it's probably best for me to give you some resources because that's very complicated. Do you know the Street Epistemology group with Anthony Magnabosco? Street Epistemology is wonderful. Its exercise is the idea. So epistemology is how we know things, right? So street epistemologists help people explore their reasoning behind things. And so instead of trying to persuade people, the idea is to try to figure out their reasoning. So to be almost a passenger with them, helping them investigate their beliefs.
So I have figured out, because I've been trying it for decades, the reason is that the majority of the population values their feelings above logic.
Yeah, I would say a lot of us use feelings though. Yeah, the other thing I would suggest is, do you know David McRaney? He's the host of the You Are Not So Smart podcast, which is a wonderful podcast if you are podcast junkies like me. But he has a new book out called How Minds Change. And it's really good. So maybe useful for you.
Are any of these resources mentioned on the handout at the end of our
No, they're not, but that's a really good question. If you go to my website, there is a link at the top that says resources, and I think everything that I've mentioned is on there. Yes.
Just kind of also observation and I'll ask a question on. The thing is, like today in journalism and just on social media, there's such a thing about getting there first, getting onto the biggest viral thing, being, getting a view on this thing, getting hot takes, as they say, out. And I'm just wondering, like, building antibodies to this information, I'm just wondering, like, how effective is that against this particular culture? I mean, 4chan has been talking about these, like, seeing these astroturfing, these fake scandals for a long time, and even apparently this latest micro chicken one was apparently one of theirs as well.
Okay.
And that, took off on TikTok, and the journalists began talking about this. And I'm just thinking, like, in this era of cheap journalism, I guess, like fast food journalism, things like journalism, like getting people to stop for a moment and think, okay, let me take some time to investigate this in a highly competitive environment where scandals looms. Just wondering, like, how do antibodies work in that?
Are you talking about the journalists themselves or how people consume the journalism?
Or both. I mean, the journalists do this because it works. It gets eyeballs, it gets clicks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, my focus has always been in the classroom and reaching other educators. Like every time we can get an educator, we get all their students. And so I think finding education more broadly is one of our best shots. I think our mental immunity project is going to have something for journalists as well. Although, I mean, they've got a really tough job, and that question is probably slightly out of my purview. I will say for me personally, I focus on what I call the normals. So my audience are, if you picture a bell curve, there are people in the middle, right? The normals. The people over here don't really need me. The people over here aren't going to be convinced. And the amount of time and energy that it would take for me to invest in individuals over here would be time and energy I couldn't spend here. I'm not saying that reaching people over here isn't important, because it clearly is. But I think our better opportunity at it is the people in the middle persuading them and keeping them from going down a rabbit hole. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Could there be some, just to follow up, could there be some way to encourage people to disincentivize this kind of journalism?
Yeah. I mean, our model in the States with the for-profit media, primarily, it's really difficult. Gosh, I don't know. I wish I could answer that question. Could either one of you? No? Okay.
Amplification is the worst problem. I mean, that's the hardest problem. Because the writers don't wake up one day wondering if there's a Jewish space later. They read that somewhere. Somebody thought that up. The person who thought it up had a reason to think that up and sell it because it benefits them. So that's the hard thing, because the misinformation is intentionally misleading and polarizing because somebody wants it to be. And that's awful.
Yes, yeah, I'll go right next. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you have any practical tips for Facebook or other types of like social media where you're interacting with family and friends who you deeply care about, who are on other sides of political and other issues. Because normally I wouldn't get into this stuff. Normally I just live my life and do my own thing. But I'll tell you what, on Facebook, I see my cousin share an anti-vax message, and I feel obligated to say something. But do you just not even get into these? You just stay away from social media debates? Or, if you do engage, how do you do it?
Yes. So it depends on what your relationship is to that person. And how important it is to you to change their mind. I understand that desire, like I've seen blatant misinformation coming from my families and friends. If you can take the conversation private, I would suggest doing that. So any conversation that's public will probably make them more defensive. So message them privately and share with them why it's important to you. You care about this person. You care about their well-being, and ask them if you can share your ideas on things, or if you can share resources with them. But it's about a process, and as much as you can, if you can model the process of investigating beliefs in as much of a dispassionate way as possible, while maintaining a connection to the person. Because if you lose the connection, you're going to lose them. I have blocked family because it's just been too much for me. And if that's where you get, I just feel like you have to do what's best for you. The other thing is that in these conversations, especially if you're on a more public place, it's often not the person that you're talking to that you're going to change their mind. It's the people who are watching. So if you're engaging with somebody on a comment thread, talk to them, model these as much as possible, but recognize how many people are probably watching the conversation, not involved, and seeing how it goes. And hopefully you can sway some of them. Yes, ma'am.
If I heard you right, you said you teach biology in college, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a biologist, yeah.
So how do you incorporate what you did here today into your teaching biology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I convinced the college to not offer that class anymore. So, okay, you know how for our liberal arts education you need different gen ed requirements? So around the country, the vast majority of students take an intro bio course for their their science class. And that class is the one where, like, I remembered I was teaching my students cell division, and it was about my cancer, so I was trying to make it relevant and so on, but I just, why do my students need to know the stages of protein synthesis, right? Or why do they need to know about endoplasmic reticulum? I think that's important, but if I had one semester to teach the average person what I think they should know about how science works, this was not it. So to my college's credit, we had a long series of meetings about why we teach non-major science, what our goals were, and then went through our courses to figure out if our courses were meeting those goals. And if they weren't, we got rid of them. And so then I replaced it with a course that I call Science for Life, and that's where I teach this. So the structure of the course is, I actually start with witchcraft, because I want my students to be able to evaluate beliefs that aren't triggering to them. But the idea is epistemology. How do we come to our beliefs? How do we figure out if they're true? And then I do perception and memory. And then I give them a toolkit, the Flutter toolkit that's on here. It's basically how to evaluate claims. It's critical thinking and science reasoning. And then I do biases and fallacies and information literacy. And then we go into how science works and different ways of studying things. The things that look like science but that aren't, like pseudoscience and science denial. And along the way I use a lot of pseudoscience, like astrology, homeopathy, ghosts. We do denial, like climate change denial. I teach them how to cold read, like psychics. But the idea is that I'm actually trying to provide them with a way of thinking about the world so that they're equipped to continue to learn and find reliable sources of information so that they can make better decisions. But the answer to your question is that it doesn't fit in a class like that. And my point is that if we're talking about people who aren't going to be scientists for the rest of their life, which one of those is more important? Now, I know how I think, but... Oh, yes, sir.
You talk about black and white people.
People who are what?
Black and white thinkers. And to get strong opinions about whatever. And then there are the centrists, different shades of gray, for example. And it's hard to form strong opinions between that two. How do you balance that?
Yeah.
Especially in the political arena, for example.
So there's something known as the illusionary splendor effect, which is basically we think we know more than we can. When asked to explain something, we realize we don't know much we do. So some of the experiments that are like, how well do you know how a bicycle works? I don't know. I'm just like a bike or life, right? 10 out of 10. Okay, draw. And then when you draw a bike, you realize, oh, actually, figure out how these pieces work together. Or, how well do you know how a toilet works? Or a zipper? Like, these are some of the basic studies. But the idea is that people tend to have strong opinions because they think they know more than they do. So one of the best ways that we can address that is by getting them to reflect on their knowledge by having them explain it. Does that make sense? And it actually turns out to moderate extreme opinions, because if I have really strong opinions about GMOs, and then I realize I actually don't know much about GMOs, then I might moderate my position a bit.
These exercises about creating these fake conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Would you please tell us a couple of examples of these fake conspiracy theories that students have come up with? And also, does the exercise involve testing these in either in their own social circles or in other real world social circles to see, examine the dynamics of spread and stuff like that?
Okay, so what I do